They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, good morning, folks. Welcome to Conduit News Radio. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul Harrell this morning, but we have a great show for you today. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to have two guests with us. First, Mr. Joey Williams, Development Director with Political Strategies, will be on. We're going to be talking a little bit about this idea of free press versus the media. As you'll see, we got the theme of the week, the whiteboard that we're going to have up very shortly. Free press versus the media. That's the theme. And when you think about free press versus the media, I think everyone kind of grew up with the understanding that, yes, we have a free press. Well, what does that mean? Is it just, the government's not coming in and telling the press what to say? Is it just the government not silencing the press? Is that the idea of a free press? Or was the free press always this idea? I think this is probably the better conclusion. The free press, throughout the history of our country, was the idea that you can tune in and read a newspaper, you can tune in and watch the news, and you're just going to get the facts of what happened. And I think we're at the point now with most major mainstream news outlets that a free press is kind of gone. The press has almost lost their ability, I think, to just report the news as it is. There's constantly a filter, constantly a bias, constantly an agenda. And maybe that's okay. I think there's obviously more right-leaning or left-leaning news outlets out there, and they're pretty honest about that. For example, Conduit News is obviously a conservative news site. But Paul and Conduit News is very upfront and honest about that. But then you have people like CNN or ABC News, CBS News, kind of these more mainstream news outlets that still reach a lot of people. And they try to come across as unbiased. So we're going to talk a little more about that, though. Mr. Joey Williams at 7 o'clock. Then a special treat coming up at 7:30 today. Mr. Kerry Cheshire, the Vice President of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and Power Texans Group. They just yesterday, he was sending me some emails last night. Just yesterday, the Texas House voted down this idea of banning taxpayer-funded lobbyists. So we're going to talk about the issue. What is that? What does it look like? How it's being done in Texas, how it's being done here in Arkansas. And then we'll get an update from Kerry of how that played out. What are the interests that stopped and killed this issue? It was actually I was looking on Twitter, stopping lobbyists who get paid from government entities, from cities and counties and school districts, stopping taxpayer money from being used for that. That was a top 5 issue for the Texas, a Republican group out of Texas, the Republican Party of Texas, I guess. And that failed. So we'll talk more about that coming up at 7:30. We also have the latest news of the day. There's going to be a House Speaker race in the Arkansas House of Representatives. We'll talk about that later in the show, and we'll also talk about the new youth prisons contract for here in the state of Arkansas. Legislative Council said no, we don't want that company. ASA said yes, we do. I'll let you, the listener, kind of decide where you think that went. But we'll talk about that more. But first, I want to start off the show today a little bit like we did yesterday. During the legislative session, there was so much happening. It was so fast. They're just down there between 60 and 90 days. And towards the end of the session, this was one of the top issues. It was this idea of a $100 million tax increase to then fund an earned income tax credit. Okay, this was Senate Bill 571 by Senator Jim Hendren, the governor's nephew, and it was pretty. I thought it was pretty straightforward. We'll raise $100 million in taxes. Democrats were fully on board. I know Paul when he talked about it and showed the picture of the Democrats flanking Senator Jim Hendren, announcing this $100 million tax increase to fund an EITC, a welfare program, check program. The Democrat Party of Arkansas posted it on their website, and so Paul captured that and showed it here on this show and talked about it. And then, gosh, within hours, I think, maybe minutes of that, it was just gone and it hasn't come back. So that was interesting. But at the end of the day, what this bill would have done, it would have closed small businesses in Arkansas, specifically vape shops in Arkansas. It was going to try to tack on a 67% tax on vape shops for selling vape products rather than just straight cigarette products. And one of the interviews that I thought was one of the best of the session that Paul had was with one of these small business owners from a vape shop, and we're gonna play a part of that interview. But folks, small business in Arkansas is the backbone of this economy, and to try to adopt policies that not only hurt small business, but in this case, this would have closed small businesses. There is a small business vape shop owner, several of them, showed up in the Senate Revenue and Tax Committee, looked those legislators in the eyes, turned and looked at Senator Hendren and said, this is going to close my small business. And I'm employing this many people, and they told the stories of who they're employing and how they need the job, how they're supporting their families. And those legislators just seemed completely unfazed by that. Some of them. Senator Hendren, he just completely unfazed because he had a mission and he was going to carry it out. And that was to pass this bill. It didn't really matter what these people said at that point. And I think it's unfortunate, and I think it's wrong. Now, thankfully, when this bill got over to the House, it was pretty much dead on arrival. It didn't go anywhere. It was never actually heard in the Revenue and Tax House Committee. And what I found interesting was these were Republicans. Republicans with Democrats passed this bill out of the Senate. In the House, there is an EITC bill earlier in this session, before Jim Hendren's EITC bill. It was brought forward by a Democrat, Tippy McCullough, about one of the most far-left Democrats in the House, I guess. She brought the bill forward. That thing got 2 votes in the House Revenue and Tax Committee. 2 Democrats, and that was it. That thing failed miserably, or fantastically, I guess you could say. But for some reason, if a Republican puts their name behind a terrible policy, then it gets all these votes. I don't understand it. So that was this session. In committee, only 2 votes, 2 Democrats. Last session, this EITC bill got 4 votes on the House floor from Republicans. 4. That was it. Now, the Democrats voted for it, but it failed miserably or fantastically, however you see it. So, and those were just standalone EITC bills, okay? Those were just doing an EITC. Those did not even include Hendren's $100 million tax increase to fund it. So I would argue that's almost even worse. But anyways, I wanted to play this interview that Paul had because it really focuses on the real world impact that the legislative session that legislators have on small business here in Arkansas. Conduit opposed this bill because Conduit supports small business. Always has, and will continue to. So we'll go ahead and play this interview. Again, it's a owner of a vape shop, and I believe she actually represents a group of vape shops. Drippers Vape Shop owner Scout Stubbs, back during the session, talking about how this massive tax increase would hurt small business here in Arkansas.
You know, if there's ever been an example of elitism and how elites in this state do not care about the little guy, you need to go and watch the committee meeting between Jim Hendren and the small business owners who are in the vaping industry, and watch his reaction as he has to sit there as business owner after business owner comes to the table and talks about how his legislation to tax vaping, raise taxes on cigarettes, and put in the Democrat policy goal of an earned income tax credit welfare program would hurt their business when you the entire package, the bill. And it's just fascinating to me how, I guess, Republicans are for business, but you have to be the right kind of business. Yesterday, when I was at the Marble Palace, I met a vape shop business owner. Her name is Scout Stubbs. Scout joins us on the phone right now. Scout, how are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing well.
Scout, I know that you're disappointed in the outcome. It only got 18 votes, but it does pass, goes on to the House, where I think it will have more trouble. Have you been to the Capitol very much? I mean, was this one of your first times there?
No, we were there last session doing similar things. At that point, we didn't have our nonprofit started, and so it was a lot more difficult communicating with some of these Democrat legislators that our products are harm reduction, our products are 95% safer than cigarettes, because if you go in there, the business owner saying that out there saying, oh, you're just trying to peddle your product. But going in there this time, we have our association. There's close to 300 shops in the state of Arkansas, and so we're trying to go up there and represent all of their interests, and they're all small business.
And they know, obviously, that this bill is going to, devastate their businesses. I mean, that was your testimony. At one point, I was sitting next to you in the gallery, and at one point, I think Senator Hendren said something, and there were several people in the gallery that just turned around and went, well, that's socialism. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I know that this bill is dressed up as appealing to lower-income families, but it's redistribution of wealth. And I'm no expert in tax policy. All I'm an expert in is the vaping industry. And I know what it will do to our business. But, yeah, socialism at its finest is going to destroy small businesses in the state of Arkansas.
What will this do to your business? Now, first of all, tell us the name of your vaping business.
So my husband and I started Drippers Vape Shop in Greenbrier, Arkansas, with a maxed out credit card and an American dream. We started with one shop, and now we own a chain of 5 across the state. And our entire goal was to help people quit smoking. It's how I quit smoking. It's how my husband quit smoking, and it's how about 10,000 of our customers have quit smoking. And that's just in one shop. I know the story is the same with shop owners across the state. And a lot of people don't know what vaping is, but it's a consumer-driven industry, not pharmaceutical, not tobacco industry-driven industry, made by smokers for smokers who want to quit smoking.
And I see Drippers Vape Shop. You have a location in Greenbrier, Cabot, Heber Springs, Hot Springs. Pretty successful.
Yeah, and El Dorado. Yep.
And El Dorado. And so, so there's talk about firing employees if something like this happens, or closing altogether. I mean, you think vape shops will close? What would you guys have to do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't a 5%, 10%, 20% tax. This is a 67% tax, whereas before we were only paying sales and use tax. Now, I'm not naive. I know how Arkansas politics works. I know that maybe we're going to have to pay a small percentage of what they call a luxury tax on someone that wants to quit smoking. But a 67% tax is something that's going to close a lot of the shops in Arkansas. Now, we tried to clarify with Jim Hendren, the sponsor of the bill, whether that 67% tax applies to existing inventory, more like a floor tax. And he said over and over again, oh, that's not what that means in the bill. But it's written there, black and white, that it applies to existing floor tax. And if that's the case, I know a shop in Conway that's going to owe $25,000 in 2 months after this bill passes. Another friend of mine who owns 8 stores is going to owe $268,000. That's enough to close the door on any shop. Now, let's say that Jim Hendren is right, he's a man of his word, and there is no floor tax. That means that I'm going to have to compete with online sale prices. I'm also going to have to raise my prices to my customers. And so they're either going to go online, or in border towns, they're going to go to the next state over where there's not a 67% tax on vapor products.
67% tax.
67%.
And here's the thing, he's talking about how this earned income tax credit is going to be revenue neutral. Well, if you guys all shut your doors or and have less business, then that's not the case.
Yeah, he's going to be in big trouble when the money that he was supposed to get from vape shops is no longer there, because 2/3 of us, 3/4 of us have all closed in the state.
Wow. And I was talking to you about this. I think this is also really just kind of cloak and dagger legislative sleight of hand, too, because the bottom line is they know more and more people are going to vaping to quit smoking, and they're going to see this loss in revenue. And so they're actually coming after you guys, to maintain, like they're using kids. They're saying kids are doing it, it's terrible and everything else. But the government actually needs the revenue source from people smoking. And so now that people are starting to vape, they're like, we better go after the vapors.
That's exactly what's happening, and it's sad. It's a sad thing for public health if that's the cause that everyone's toting around, is that it's for public health and to encourage people to quit smoking. Well, you're increasing the tax on cigarettes by 20%. A separate bill has increased the minimum price of cigarettes by, I think, 1%. But all of that is to generate revenue for the state. And so, yes, they realize that they're losing some of that cigarette money, and they're going to try to get vapor money at the exact same rate that they get deadly combustible cigarette taxes at.
In his presentation yesterday, Senator Hendren talked about the former Philip Morris company and Juul and the tobacco, big tobacco. Talk about how what you guys do is different than what Juul is doing, and what you guys are doing are getting lumped in, and your reputation is being tarnished with the nicotine delivery system Juul.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because most people don't know the difference. Juul is partially owned by Altria, which owns Marlboro. So technically they are a big tobacco company. They started out in Silicon Valley as just their own thing, harm reduction, just like we are, but they've grown into such a popular device. I have to give credit where credit's due, that they're capturing that smoker at that gas station that's making an impulse buy, and they're saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy cigarettes today. I'm going to buy this Juul instead. And so they get started on vaping in gas stations, but I think they eventually get to the vape shops where they realize they can step down their nicotine and have a better choice of flavors, devices. It's more of a one-on-one interaction at vape shops. Juul pods are sold now at 50 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine. That's a lot. That's more than any vape shop is going to sell you. I start out people at the highest 18 milligrams per milliliter. And then after.
All right. So if you're just joining us, that was an interview that Paul Harrell had with Scout Stubbs, a vape shop owner. And in the context, that interview was about a bill that thankfully died this session. It was a $100 million tax increase to fund an EITC redistribution of wealth program, sponsored by Republican Senator Hendren. Thankfully, it did fail. Republicans in the House Revenue and Tax Committee, they weren't going to let that thing out, and they ended up actually never even having a hearing on it. So at least for the next 2 years, these vape shops, these small businesses are going to stay open. And I think that's a good thing for Arkansas. But we've got to take a break right now. You're listening to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul today, and we'll be right back after this.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, folks, welcome back to the program. As you know, if you've been a long-time listener, you know that the Patriots of Act 746 here in Arkansas are on a mission to educate you about your gun rights. And Arkansas is a constitutional carry state, which means because of a 2013 law called Act 746, you do not need a permission slip from the government to carry a gun, open or concealed, in this state. And this was even affirmed by the Arkansas legislature with 2 resolutions from the House and Senate this past session saying that Arkansas is a constitutional carry state, as well as the court decision, Taft versus State of Arkansas, where the judge said that carrying a weapon in Arkansas at this point is decriminalized to the point where the burden of proof to violate the carrying of weapons statute is
Hey folks, it's me, Paul Harrell. I want to say hello to everybody out there who's listening. We appreciate you and your support, especially those listening on KFPW, the Marshall out of Fort Smith, 96.7 FM, 1230 AM. For all of our listeners, if you ever missed the program, you can get us online at conduitnews.com, facebook.com/conduitnews, or our YouTube channel. Just search for Conduit News and be sure to click the subscribe button and click the little bell to receive notifications. Here at Conduit News Radio, we provide you multiple ways to listen to your #1 source for Arkansas news and politics. ConduitNews.com.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back, folks. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul Harrell today on Conduit News Radio. So, the Legislative Council, we were talking about some of that yesterday. Legislative Council is basically the interim legislature, I guess you can call it that. When the legislature is out of session, the Legislative Council meets and they vote on issues in the interim. So one issue that they voted on Friday was reviewing, or really they voted to not review, a contract for youth prisons. The Arkansas Legislative Council voted 9-5 to not review a contract for an Indiana company to run and manage youth prisons here in Arkansas. They were concerned basically with the track record that this company had running youth prisons in Michigan, and also it says some problems they had with their executives overseeing facilities. So this contract, pretty big deal, $15.8 million contract, and the Legislative Council voted it down 9-5. 13 members were absent, according to the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, so just almost as many people were absent. So I guess that's one way to, if you get a roll call and half the people are absent, it's probably not going to pass. But they voted this down. Well, under Arkansas law, that's basically just a recommendation, and the governor can do whatever he wants, and that's what he did. And he's going to allow this youth prisons contract to move forward. So we'll be back right after this break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. Josh Waters in for Paul today.
You have to be able to prove criminal intent, that you are going to do something with that weapon that's criminal. So it's really probably one of the biggest transfers of freedom from the government back to the people in a very long time. And my next guest that's brought to us thanks to the patrons of Act 746, Chris Ann Hall, would probably say that that freedom has always been inherent because it's a God-given freedom and not something the government can take away in the first place. Chris Ann Hall, radio host, constitutional attorney, joins us. Chris Ann, thanks for coming back on this morning.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I love being here.
So you're going to be in Arkansas. I want to first say this. You're coming back to Arkansas in October, going to be in Little Rock and giving a lecture in the Capitol Rotunda. Really excited for that because I got to listen to your classes 2 nights a couple of months ago, and I just want to say you are such a gifted teacher, and I enjoyed the lectures very, very much.
Well, thank you. That is great encouragement to me. I really appreciate you taking the time to say that.
Well, keep going. I mean, I know you're going to keep going, but I guess I was inspired by that level of depth about our founding fathers, about the concepts of freedom that they were pursuing, and how receptive everybody was to it. And I just thought to myself, you're doing this all over the country, and I think people are getting it. You know what I mean? I think this could really pay off in the future if there's ever an opportunity for example, the states to maybe step back up and reclaim lost sovereignty. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's our hope and plan. I mean, that's why we've been traveling now for 9 years, averaging a little over 260 classes in 22 states every year. We're teaching middle school, high school, colleges, adult group. I have a state legislator class. I have a law enforcement training, which the officers can get actual educational credit for. And I'm just, we are seeding for a harvest. We are casting out the seed of truth for the Constitution and waiting for that to really, really ignite the people. There's a quote by Abigail Adams that really is inspirational to me, and she says, "We watch as liberty ignites and spreads from soul to soul," and that's really how it works. Part of the challenge that we have, Paul, is that people are still in search of a Messiah, and people are still in.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. Josh Waters in today for Paul Harrell. Got a good rest of the show for you. Coming up in the next hour, we have Mr. Joey Williams, Development Director with Political Strategies, will be on to talk about our theme of the week, free press versus the media. The idea of a free press. What does that mean today? What does that mean in 2019? And so we'll talk about that coming up at 7:30. Special guest Carrie Cheshire, our friend down in Texas, is going to come on and talk about their recent fight with taxpayer-funded lobbyists. It's been an issue here in Arkansas. Sounds like an even bigger issue down in Texas. So we'll talk about that later in the show. Hey, if you support conservative media like Conduit News, they need your support financially. And so I just want to encourage anyone out there listening on terrestrial radio stations, on Facebook.com/Conduit News. Maybe you're listening over at YouTube, Conduit News. Maybe you're listening right now on the website, conduitnews.com. For all those that are not listening on the website, go over to conduitnews.com and go to the support tab and see how you can support conservative news here in Arkansas. You can become a Patreon subscriber. I'm a Patreon subscriber. You can do $5, $10, $25 a month to help support this show. You can donate to the other Conduit entities to help support the mission of a more limited government here in Arkansas. And that kind of goes in with the theme of the week, free press versus media. there's someone paying. There's always someone paying to get a message out there. We want that to be the message of the people, the conservative body politic here in Arkansas. So I encourage everyone listening to consider how they can support both Conduit News Radio and the overall mission at Conduit to measurably reduce the size and scope of government in Arkansas. Because what we know when that happens is there's more economic freedom in Arkansas and more prosperity for Arkansas. So, wanted to get back to another one of these impressions of the sessions. We did this yesterday when I was filling in, highlighting, I think, one of the top impressions of the sessions yesterday with State Representative Grant Hodges. Another impression of the session that really stood out to me was State Representative John Payton. In one part of his interview that we'll listen to here in a minute, he talks about how he's been down there and how he's learned session after session kind of how to respond to these tactics, how to respond to different issues, so that he's always putting his principles forward. And State Representative John Payton has always been a strong conservative vote in the House of Representatives. And it's just really refreshing to, being down there, you're watching it, and then I know for me, I'll read in the newspaper and I see greatest session of all time. It was decreed by the governor, greatest session of all time. And my first thought was, well, the session just ended like a week ago. We don't really know historically how this is going to turn out. This sounds like something you'd hear from Kim Jong-un in North Korea. I hereby decree this is the best thing ever, and therefore it is now. Like, give me a break. But we do know from the session there's a net tax increase on the people. And Paul's been talking about that a lot. And so, but anyway, let's go ahead and get into this interview. This was an interview with Paul, impression of the session from State Representative John Payton.
Impression of the session from Nelda Speaks for our online audience. That was yesterday, State Representative Nelda Speaks. And now we have another impression of the session. Please welcome to the program. We have State Representative John Payton is with us. John, how you doing, sir?
Doing great. Good morning.
Good
Good to see you.
Let me turn your mic on. That would help. And let me go ahead and, sorry. I'm
all right.
on the ball here. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. So let's just start generally. John Payton, what was your impression of the session 2019?
Well, I have tried, knowing that was your topic, to wrap it up, and I'm unable to. I mean, I have highs and lows. As the sessions go by, and this is my third general session. My goodness, there are things that I'm delighted about. I love voting, for against the abortion issue, and for the bills that we've been passing in the last 6 years. And then I get so frustrated, at the revenue side of things when we continue to pass revenue increases, and how the revenue is spent. So anyway, I can't wrap it into one thing. I mean, the session is torture in a lot of ways, because you're doing the highs and lows, trying to take care of my businesses and personal life. And by the end of the session, I usually get very physically run down. Yeah. And again, this year, in the last week, I was sick, taking antibiotics and everything.
Well, I think you're one of the best, one of the better state representatives voting record. I think it's because you do have a job back home. Honestly.
Well, I appreciate that. I still consider myself a voter and a constituent more than a state representative.
Yeah.
But, government will continue to operate when I'm not in it. And what we do today is laying foundations and principles for how it's going to operate when I'm not there. And, I'm going to live my life out as a constituent, not as a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We're talking with State Representative John Payton. Now, John, you voted no on the bill to continue the levy of the 0.5% sales tax that's set to expire. Voted no on that bill. You also voted no on internet sales tax, and you voted no on the gas tax increase. Now, my question to you, you're one of 12 Republicans that voted no on all three of those bills. So how did you stand up to the establishment's argument saying we've got to have more money from the people?
Well, again, I've been there for 6 years, and revenue has continued to increase over that time. I had the figures in my head and could quote them readily during the session, but I think it was over $800 million worth of revenue growth since I've been in there. And my argument is we do need the funding for roads and bridges for highway program, but it's been there, and we could have done it just purely through growth. And Jonathan Barnett introduced a bill, and I'm trying to think who reintroduced one, Julie Mayberry, this go around, that would have just taken some growth in sales tax revenue, even limited to automobiles and car parts and things, and devoted that to roads and bridges. And if we had done that 6 years ago, that problem would be cured now. If we had done it in this session, it'd be cured in a very short period of time going forward. But anyway, it's easier to spend the revenue we have on things that the people would not approve of, and then hold up something that's very important to the constituents and say we don't have enough money to do roads and bridges or K through 12,
Yes.
And so when I look at the bottom line, I believe there's plenty of money there, and we need to go back and reprioritize where we're spending it.
I want to go back to the revenue growth here in just a minute, but at the end of the day, do you think the people of Arkansas are paying more money to the government after the 92nd General Assembly than before?
Absolutely. I think it's been proven in the numbers that we got for this month, a record month in revenue. And most of those laws and bills have not even taken place. But, I'm a car dealer.
Right.
And if you give me a pencil and a pen, I can do math. When you have people doing projections 5 or 10 years down the road to say this is what something's going to cost, or this is what something is going to raise in revenue, they're going to be biased in their opinions, and they're going to have to make estimates and guesses. And what seems to happen over and over again is when we project down the road how much a tax cut is going to reduce revenue, it seems to get over projected. And when we project down the road 8 or 10 years how much a tax increase or a revenue increase of some kind, how much it's going to bring in, that seems to get underestimated.
Yes.
And so, I'm very leery when they say that they're going to bring a balanced bill, that is revenue neutral, because that's based on projections 8 or 10 years down the road, and they made the math come out as revenue neutral. But I'm very suspicious most of the time as to whether or not it's going to play out that way.
And you're right, because the government estimates are wrong. The headline in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette today, Michael Wickline, revenue in April at record for state. Now, you went to the floor on the roads bill, on the gas tax, both of those bills, and you said, hey, listen, like you said, since you've been there, how long you've been there?
I've been there 6.5 years.
6.5 years. We have had a revenue growth to the state of Arkansas, more money to the people, just based on, the economy or whatever. Just they keep getting more of our money, $500 million.
That's what it was.
That's $500 million. And you're saying we could just say everything extra we get from the people, we're going to get to this next year, whatever. We could just pay our roads that way, and that was logical. You are proven right in this month. I mean, this month they had a 15% more over their projections. The general revenue collections increased $116 million this month alone over the same month a year ago. So they've already gotten $116 million more.
And Paul, it's not hard to figure because, consumer spending is going up. Wages are going up. Not only because of the mandatory minimum wage raise, but also just because of competition. Unemployment numbers are down, which means there's more people employed. All of those things generate sales tax and income tax, and all of those things are going to raise revenue. It's pretty obvious. I had a bill that would have given some sales tax relief on cheaper used cars and raised the exemption from $4,000 to $7,500. When you buy a car under $7,500, it would have been exempt from sales tax. It had a revenue impact of a little over $12 million. And so they were asking me, how are you going to pay for it? They're in this mindset, that you have to pay for a tax cut. And I went to BLR jokingly and said, how do I draft an appropriation bill to pay for a tax cut? It's that absurd.
Yeah.
But anyway, I kept telling them over and over again, revenue growth will easily cover this $12 million hit to the budget. And obviously,
Let's talk about that bill. That was a bill that would have been great for low-income families. You've got a used car that's been taxed several times already. It would increase the exemption for sales tax from $4,000 or less than $4,000 to $7,500. That'd have been huge for middle-class
exactly.
people.
I mean, people need dependable transportation. If they're going to get on their feet and get back to work, first of all, employers need dependable employees that are going to show up to work. Well, if their car breaks down or won't start in the morning, they're not going to be to work on time.
Yep.
So the more dependable the transportation is, the more important it is, for their new job and to get on their feet. And then, of course, they need low maintenance. Well, you buy a vehicle under $4,000 to avoid the sales tax, and it's going to be higher maintenance than, of course, if you can buy a little better vehicle for $7,000 or $69.95. There's so many components. As a car dealer, I can take a vehicle for $69.95 and probably get you a 6-month, 6,000-mile warranty included. You get under $4,000, I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so, my argument was struggling families needed it, but it's not just a benefit to struggling families. I mean, it doesn't matter if you make $100,000, $200,000 a year. You may choose to buy a cheaper vehicle at some point for an employee or for one of your kids going to college or whatever. And so, anybody could take advantage of it. It wasn't focused, exemption for a certain population. I mean, anybody could take advantage of it, but obviously more than anything, it helps struggling families, get back on their feet.
We're talking with State Representative John Payton. It's his impression of the session. He's from Cleburne County. Your district, you were saying, does go south of Heber Springs. That wraps around?
It does. So it starts at the county line, which Rosebud's in White County. So I don't get Rosebud, but it starts there at the county line, Cleburne County line. It runs north and then east of Heber Springs, which is where I live, out past Wilburn. And then it comes back and goes north of Heber Springs and over to Greers Ferry, includes Greers Ferry. Then it heads straight up between Mountain View and Marshall. And it stops just south of Mountain Home. So Greers Ferry and Norfolk are my two largest towns.
Hey, yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. That's great. All right, well, so he's given his impression of the session. Now, we've got all this money that's coming, and I've seen the numbers. We're going to be releasing those numbers very soon at conduitnews.com. DFNA zone numbers in terms of fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 2021, just how much money is coming from the people. When you take everything you've done, the tax cut, the income tax cuts, which was good, but then you look at the gas tax increase, all of these things, you look at the numbers, what's it going to be? Because, see, I don't think the people care. Like, the gas tax starts October, like they're collecting. Internet sales tax starts in July. They start collecting, right? These tax cuts, though, 2 years. Corporate income tax cuts start, it doesn't get fully realized, even further. And you can't bind future legislatures. So if anything out past 2 years is irrelevant, in my opinion, because you guys are going to come back and you could undo all of that if you wanted to. Case in point, the half-cent sales tax is supposed to expire, and the 2012 legislature promised that it would, and your colleague, not you, but, now they're put it on the ballot to keep it.
Right, and we definitely, I hope that the people vote that down.
Me too.
I learned a very harsh lesson in my first term, and of course I believe in local government and I believe in local control, and so we had a resolution, which it was my first term, and you go into a general session with 2 weeks worth of orientation under your belt, and so we had a resolution to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. And it was the one that dealt with the term limits and some other things, and so I was sitting there going to vote no on this resolution. I wasn't in the committee that it came through, and I didn't like the resolution. And somebody leaned over and said, "Well, you don't have to worry about it. All you're doing is referring it out to the people to vote for." And I thought, well, that goes with my principle of local control and things. So I voted yes on it. Well, man, I wish I hadn't have. So I've learned over time, you better read them, you better know what they are, and if you would be against it, then don't just refer it out to the people to let them decide. But if you're against it, vote against it.
Right.
And so that's what I did this time, and I voted against that one. But it is going out to the people, and I hope the people vote it down.
Me too. We're looking at a $290 million increase if it passes.
And I would like to go back to the car tax just long enough to say most of my colleagues supported that. We had 87 co-sponsors in the House, had plenty of votes in the Senate to get it passed. In the Senate committee, I had 5 votes, which is what's required to get it passed, but it was late in the session, and they have to be in their seats. If there's any opposition, I have to get all 5 votes there at the same time, and we were unable to do that.
And I understand there were people running different directions, and it was really difficult to coordinate. And let's just give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and let's say that it really just was a process that, it would just...
Well, and I met with the governor and his staff, and they never did get on board and come out and support it,
Yeah.
That would have helped, and it definitely probably would have got it across the finish line if we could have got the governor's support.
It would have been huge for low-income families who are, wanting to get to work. And, I was in the market for a car. I was hoping it was going to pass. All right, so we're talking with State Representative John Payton. Let's talk about Arkansas Works. Towards the end of the session, a federal judge strikes it down, says work requirements can't happen. Now, I know they're challenging that. Trump administration's challenging that ruling. But what were your thoughts on that? Immediately, like right before that ruling came out, I'm assuming it leaked and they forced through the DHS appropriations budget in the Senate. And the next day, less than 48 hours, they were asking the House to vote on it as well. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, there were rumors on the House floor more than 48 hours in advance that this was likely going to be ruled against, and that we needed to speed up the legislative process, on that bill. I really, when I was hearing the rumors and they were talking about, we've got to hurry, I was like, I'm not as naive as I used to be. And even though I'm against the expansion and against this bill, and we'll vote against that stuff, I guess, as long as I'm there, I had no reason to believe that even if the judge ruled against it, that we were going to throw the expansion in the trash can.
Right.
And so I was a little shocked that they were running around on the rumors saying we need to speed up the process for this legislation because there's a possibility the judge is going to rule against it. And to me, that was, kind of tongue in cheek.
That's so dishonest that they would be doing that because they just are trying.
I think they were generally worried, but I don't know why they would be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So anyway, the thing about the work requirement that came out in all of that was because of the judge's ruling. Several people who have said, we've got a work requirement, have said, it's not that important. People who are removed from the expansion because of the work requirement, it happens in the second quarter earliest it can happen. Usually it's the third and fourth quarter of the year, and they're all re-eligible January 1st. So even though you remove, 40 or 50,000 people, and I don't think it's ever been that many, because of the work requirement, then January 1st, they're all eligible again. So you may save, 6 months or at the very most 7 or 8 months.
All right. That was a great interview. Impression of the session, State Representative John Payton, highlighting the good, discussing some not so good. And one of the best bills of the session, though, was his bill for used cars to increase that sales tax exemption, basically a tax cut for families and middle income and low income folks who want to get a car. If you pay, I think his was up to $7,500 and below for a car, no sales tax. That's a huge help. That might make the difference in the type of car someone can get. I think the exemption right now is about $4,000. So we have to take a break right now, though. This is Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul, and we will be back after this to talk House Speaker race. There is a speaker race going in the House of Representatives, so stay tuned to that. We'll be right back.
Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Of this political quick fix. Unfortunately, there's no red pill that we can take and no incantation that we can say. There's actually no political personality that we can elect that's going to change what's going wrong in America. We were built on the principles of self-governance, and our government doesn't work unless the people self-govern. And people have been miseducated for so long, and we've been taught the wrong things for so long that even the best intentioned people can go work in the wrong direction. And so what we hope to do is just, like I said, spread that seed, because Samuel Adams gave us a warning. He said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue."
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back, folks. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul Harrell today on Conduit News Radio, and the Marble Palace does have a House of Representatives speakership race that is going on, I guess, right now, maybe jockeying for votes. So current Speaker of the House in the state of Arkansas is Matthew Shepard, and he has decided to run for a second term, 2-year term as Speaker of the House. All state representatives of Arkansas have a 2-year term, and so he would be Speaker from now up until January of 2021, and then he would try to be Speaker again from 2021 until January of 2023. So he'd be 4 years total as Speaker. But he has gotten a challenger. Joe, do you know who the challenger is? Guess. It's a very well-known state representative on this show. It's not Dan Douglas. Joe Jett will be challenging Matthew Shepard to be House Speaker. Yeah, Joe anti-roll call Jett. So I don't know how I feel about that. Because if Joe Jett becomes Speaker, I can't ask for a roll call on the House of Representatives floor. I can still ask for a roll call in a committee if he just stays as a committee chairman. So, I don't know. I think I'm kind of torn. I'd hate to see Joe Jett go, but it should be an interesting fight. Joe Jett is a recent Republican. Changed parties just a few years ago to maintain that chairmanship on the Rev and Tax Committee. Matthew Shepard, I think, had pretty good support. I thought the session, it wasn't maybe a great session on taxes and spending, but, it ran efficiently, if that's, a positive thing they want to look at. So that's going to be interesting, but that's the matchup. Joe Jett versus Matthew Shepard for the House speakership. I don't think they'll decide until sometime next year, but We'll watch it. Got a great second hour for you. Stay tuned to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk, 101.3 FM and 1230 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Was preserved. He said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. And I think this miseducation that has overcome America, that has us more focused on tribalistic political endeavors rather than knowledge and virtue, is really, really the big threat in America.
Universal ignorance. I definitely think there's a degree of that. The encouraging part is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was always told that you really only had like 20% of the colonists, back in the day, that really kind of took charge and were pushing for the separation from Great Britain. So I mean, first of all, is that true? Or is that just a statistic that's thrown around that's inaccurate? And likewise, I mean, if 20% of the country really knew, first principles, that would go a long way, I think.
Yeah, it really is. Now, it's difficult to know whether those statistics are accurate or not. We didn't take any exit polls or anything at that time. But the thought is that there were about 30% in favor of separation, but of those 30%, only 30% of those were actually active in the battle. So I think the typical societal bell curve tells us 10% is about the maximum real activity you can get with any group of people. But that's enough. I mean, seriously, if we have 30% of the American population educated enough to say, I'm gonna understand that liberty is more important than comfort, and I'm gonna actually accept a degree of discomfort so that my child can be free, and then we will have the opportunity to really, really motivate and activate the bell curve 10%.
We're talking with Chris Ann Hall. You can find out more at libertyfirstuniversity.com. She's got a fantastic story, a constitutional attorney. And I'm reading an article right now, a lesson on gun control at chrisannhall.com. And I really like in the first paragraph, the last sentence, the Second Amendment is not about self-defense from criminals. Talk a little bit about what you mean there, Chris Ann.
That article, I'm very excited about that article. That article has gone around the globe, actually. That article was picked up in Poland. I don't know if your listeners are aware, but Poland is going through some political changes, and they're rewriting their constitution. And the rewriters of their constitution picked up my article, that particular article, and are using it as a model to create a guarantee and a duty of the government to protect the people's rights to keep and bear arms in Poland.
Wow.
So I was like, woohoo! But that's what we have to understand.
I don't want to move to Poland, though. That's
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I don't either. But nonetheless, I think that's part of the greatness of America. Actually, our founders believed that, and they said this, that they were creating a movement of liberty that they expected to spread throughout the world, something that had never been seen anywhere else. And I believe that when America is operating properly, we fulfill that mission. The problem is we're not really operating properly. And one of our biggest misconceptions is the source of our rights, the difference between a right and a benefit. And we have many people in America that call the second, our right to bear arms, they call it a Second Amendment right. Your right to keep and bear arms doesn't come from the Bill of Rights. It doesn't come from the Constitution. It is not a Second Amendment right. It's as you said, it's an inherent right. Samuel Adams wrote an essay called The Rights of the Colonists in 1772. And he said, among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, to life; second, for liberty; third, property; together, number four, the fourth, with the right to protect and defend them in the
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul Harrell this morning on Conduit News Radio. Hey, if you're just joining us and you missed the first hour, I want to encourage you, go on over and get the first hour of the show. So many options, conduitnews.com, facebook.com, Conduit News, YouTube, Conduit News. Maybe you're a fan of podcasts. I like podcasts. You can go over to the Apple Podcast Store. Just search Conduit News, get the podcast, or on SoundCloud, get the podcast. So many options to get the latest in Arkansas news and politics. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about free speech, and that's because the theme of the week. I feel like I need a megaphone. The theme of the week. The theme of the week this week is free press versus media. Okay, and to come on and talk a little bit about this concept is Mr. Joey Williams, Development Director with Political Strategies. Good morning, Joey. How's it going?
Hey, good morning, Josh. It's going well. How are you?
I'm good. So we're talking a little bit about this theme in the first hour, this idea of free press versus media. What does that mean to you, the free press, the media, and kind of juxtapositioning those against one another?
Sure. Well, it's really a great topic. And before I begin, I have to say you're doing an awesome job. And I think I'm not alone by saying that. Filling in for Paul is a huge endeavor. And you're doing great, by the way. I think it's a really good theme. It's a really good topic. Because there is a difference. You know, if you look at history, you look at how newspapers and how we got the news out to citizens of any country in the beginning versus what it is now, there's a difference. There's a big difference, it seems. It seems like, you know, if you have when you're looking at numbers, for example, if you're looking at, you know, some of the statistics of what Fox News has, what cable news has compared to newspapers and et cetera, newspapers have declined dramatically. The subscriptions have declined. Even when you're looking at big news media sources like CNN or MSNBC, when you don't even have enough watchers or viewers to fill a thimble. Why are these companies still being propped up? Why are these news cable networks still being propped up? And, you know, it's all about truth in my mind to find the difference between, you know, news and media. The news nowadays has to be more appealing. It has to be more sensational to get those viewers in. I think that hurts truth in the end.
Yeah, you know, you made a good point there. I was talking to someone yesterday about the Democrat Gazette. They're moving to digital only for Monday through Saturday. And this was in the context of kind of comparing it to government, but the business model of a newspaper, you got to be profitable or you got to cut expenses.
Exactly.
Whereas government, if you're not, you know, if your expenses outgo your revenue, you just go raise taxes on people. But that's a little side note. But I think you're right. I think this idea of a free press, that historically was people trusted it. They trusted their newspaper. They wanted to pay money to get the information. Knowledge is power was a strong concept. I think it still is. The model has really changed, but people wanted to pay money to get that information, and they thought they were getting it for the longest time, I think, from some type of kind of just a straight shooter. Here are the facts of a story, and now you have the information. You go and do with it as you want.
Yeah, I think you hit a really good point there, that people did want to pay money to seek the truth, to seek what's really going on, in their local communities, in their own country, and it seems like looking up a timeline, it seems between the 1960s and 1980s. I know a lot of media companies were bought up by large conglomerates and other chains, which like you said earlier, if a news organization wasn't profitable, it would have to make cuts. It would have to change its way of doing reporting. It would have to change the way it provides that service to the public, because they just simply wouldn't survive. But nowadays, you have these cable news channels and networks that make hundreds of millions of dollars, and it doesn't matter if they're successful in the media arena or the news arena. Simply, they have big companies backing them, and I think that's a danger. And our founders didn't intend to have this idea of freedom of press. It was very important to them, because they knew that that England, Great Britain, were stifling any type of media outlets, even in colonial days. They weren't allowed to print certain things. They weren't allowed to talk bad about the king. They weren't allowed to do a lot of things, and that really, really scared them. And today, when you have, I call it fake news. I think fake news is a great phrase, because that's exactly what's happening. You have lots of examples. For example, the tragic shooting of Trayvon Martin. That's just one example that I can come up with. You had CNN edit a tape by Zimmerman and the 911 operator. They purposely took out the fact that the 911 operator asked Mr. Zimmerman, what was the race of the individual he was looking at the time. And he said he's African American, he looks to be black. They totally took that out. And the public went bananas over that. They labeled him as a racist, and when you get to that point in our news system where so much truth is almost blocked out, I mean, there's a lot of issues that can arise from that, and that's just one of many examples.
Yeah, you have seen the rise of the term fake news, obviously, with President Trump, and
oh yeah,
I have a kind of mixed feelings about it. I think it's kind of hilarious when he calls out the fake news media and talks about it and highlights it and trashes CNN. I think it's funny. But what he's not done that I think some people say he's done, he's basically taken, just out there and be like, hey, I think they're fake news. This is what they do. What I haven't seen, really, he may have said, I don't know, but what I have seen some here in Arkansas is elected officials trying to silence news stations, radio programs. They want just for them to go away. They want to silence free speech in Arkansas. And I think that's very dangerous when an elected official is advocating to use, maybe not by government force, maybe by government force, tactics to try to silence free speech against them. Because it's against them, it's highlighting things maybe they don't want to hear that they have done. So what are your thoughts on that, Joey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's extremely dangerous to limit those types of free speech outlets. To have a politician say, this news station or this area could say anything they want about me, but because it's bad, I'm going to limit that. That's the definition of censorship, and that's not what our founding fathers intended. That's not healthy for a public to be part of. The truth hurts sometimes, and it's an old saying, but it does. And the media, or I'm sorry, the press rather, has always been there to kind of keep our politicians in check and keep them accountable to the people. And that's why so many citizens rely on the news every single day, no matter where they get it from. And the issue is that source really conveying the truth without any large biases. And so I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah. You know what these politicians should maybe do is just go show up at Facebook or Twitter and be like, hey, I don't like what they're saying. I don't think you're going to probably like what they're saying either, and get them shut down. Because that seems to be a way conservative news commentators and the like are being silenced now, is through these censorships on Facebook and Twitter and the mediums that everyone uses to get their message out there.
Yeah, and that's a whole different subject, social media and how people get news through social media. I personally am not on Twitter. I think Twitter is a terrible thing. It's just, if you read some of the comments on there and the hatred and the viciousness,
not on social media.
Oh man, it's bad. Just reading tweets that Trump puts out and reading the thousands and thousands of comments. I mean, it's almost depressing. And people can say anything they want. And nowadays everyone is a reporter. It seems like anyone that wants to comment on any type of political issue. I mean, they're their own reporters. And you have fights that break out between family members on social media, and it gets extremely hairy and very very vicious. And it is what it is. I mean, and if that's the way that we're moving towards how people actually get the news, I think there's a lot of responsibility that has to be talked about, and how we provide that truth to people.
Yep. Well, hey, Joey, I appreciate you coming on to talk about this theme of the week, free press versus media. I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, Josh. Listen, keep up the great work. And, I want to just make a point real quick, if I can. Local news is really very, very important to any society. And I think, Conduit News is a great source. And I want to encourage your listeners to sign up via text message. I'm a member, and I love it. And if your audience, all they have to do is text the word JOIN to 501-292-2683, and to get the latest in Arkansas news and politics. It's a great source. You get text messages on upcoming events. So again, that number is to 501-292-2683, and text the word JOIN to that. And look forward to talking to you again in the future, Josh.
Nice, yeah. All right, Jay, we'll talk to you later.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, folks, that's a great way. A lot of people get emails, but they might, kind of cursory review those. But a lot of people will always check their text messages. And so, that's something kind of did during the session. We sent out text messages about the scorecard, action alerts, new articles. And so, I encourage people, text the word JOIN, JOIN, to the phone number 501-292-2683. That's phone number 501-292-2683. Text the word JOIN to get the latest in Arkansas news and politics. We're going to take a break right now. Coming up right after this break, a video I want to share. I thought it was one of the best moments of the legislative session, one of the best speeches from State Representative Douglas House on the issue of dark money. There's a negative connotation with that word, but he really puts into perspective the downside of trying to kind of curtail this dark money issue. So we'll cover that when we get back. You're listening to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul.
Best manner that they can. And he explains that these rights emanate from the first law of nature, the duty of self-preservation. And what we have to understand is the right to keep and bear arms, like I said, is not about protecting you from robbers and rapists. It's about protecting your life and your liberty and your property from anyone who would want to deprive you of those essential rights. And if you do not have an individual and personal right to keep and bear arms, then you are actually a slave, because then what happens is that you are enslaved to whomever you have to rely on to protect those things. So if you don't have the right to keep and bear arms, if you are not, let's just break it down here. If you are not keeping arms, right? If you are not trained in keeping arms, and you're relying on the sheriff's department to protect you or the police department to...
Hey, folks, it's me, Paul Harrell. I want to say hello to everybody out there who's listening. We appreciate you and your support, especially those listening on KFPW, the Marshall out of Fort Smith, 96.7 FM, 1230 AM. You know, for all of our listeners, if you ever missed the program, you can get us online at conduitnews.com, facebook.com/conduitnews, or our YouTube channel. Just search for Conduit News and be sure to click the subscribe button and click the little bell to receive notifications. Here at Conduit News Radio, we provide you multiple ways to listen to your number one source for Arkansas news and politics. ConduitNews.com.
Who's next to Zipline?
Me, and I'm really excited about this.
Sir, I'm sorry. The Zipline has a 350-pound weight limit, and frankly, I do not think it would be safe for you.
Oh, that's okay. I self-identify as 180 pounds, so it's cool.
Sir, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm afraid we can't let you ride the Zipline. You're too heavy. I'm sorry.
I can't believe this. I thought we had evolved as a society. I thought this was America, but I guess this is just my plight. First slavery, and now fat-shaming.
Sir, again, I'm really sorry.
You listen to me. If you don't let me ride, not only will I sue this company for discrimination, I will sue you for damages, because right now my feelings are so hurt and I feel embarrassed because I'm holding up the line.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Watch it, mister.
Look, okay, I'm sorry. I just don't think it would be safe for you.
You don't understand. I self-identify as skinny. So you have to let me ride the zip line. The Constitution says so. I get to define my own reality.
Oh, you know what? Okay, fine. Whatever. Ride the zip line. Mike, let this man ride the zip line.
Thank you. Now watch as my self-identity trumps your bigotry. See you on the other side, racist. Here I go! Doctor, thank goodness. What's the prognosis?
Sir, we've done everything we can, and you only have seconds to live.
No, you cannot say that. I do not self-identify as a dead person.
PHP Parody.
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back, everyone. You are listening to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in today for Paul. This is the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. And we're just talking about the issue of free speech and this idea, the theme of the week, free press versus the media. A bill that came up during the session that got a lot of attention was the bill is kind of titled the Dark Money Bill. In the context of this is in the judicial elections in Arkansas, there are some groups, some private groups who are running ads letting people know, for the most part, publicly available information about one of the judicial candidates. Well, that judicial candidate and her friends did not like that message being out there. So what did they do? They sued. They tried to get the government to take it down, and they won one of the cases to halt it during the first round. So that's the context of this. And this bill was House Bill 1705. And I want to get to the video, but just briefly, basically what it would do, the bill would have let a private person see a message that attempts to influence the perception of a candidate. If I say a candidate's name right now, if I say a candidate's name and their voting record right now, that's obviously possibly going to fit that definition. That could be any statement, right? Any statement. Well, if you make any statement, someone else can haul you into court, and if your organization, make you disclose all your donors. So this is State Representative Doug House. He does a great job explaining what the bill did and why it was so terrible. So let's play this speech from the 92nd General Assembly from State Representative Doug House on the issue of dark money and free speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. I was one of those 2 votes. This bill was brought to us by the Arkansas Bar Association. It was handed to me before it had any sponsors. I took one look at it, recognized it exactly what it is. It is an opportunity for them to find out who is speaking for or against one of the judicial candidates, one of their friends that they don't like, so they can find out who they are. They can track them down, intimidate them, protest them, mess with their credit, bring lawsuits according to this bill, and do all of the bad things. To correct something that you asked about, Representative Brown, absolutely, these 501c3 groups need to be concerned. Arkansas Right to Life, Arkansas Family Council, unions, police associations, fire associations, Family Council, Conduit for Action, Judicial Watch, Arkansas Faith and Ethics. All of these organizations, according to this bill, if they publish anything that attempts to influence the perception of a candidate, then they have to disclose who gives them money. What does that mean? Attempt to influence the perception of a candidate. Why else does Family Council publish that big long list? Because they're saying these are people that think like we do and we like them. That's what they're doing. They're influencing the perception. Now they've got to go back and disclose everybody that's donated to that organization. Oh, and by the way, under this same bill, you are all members of the press and publishers, according to the definitions. Do you ever put something out on Facebook? Are you trying to influence others? Do you ever mention a judge's name or a candidate's name? Of course you do. Yeah, I know Judge so-and-so. That's a good person. He's a great judge, or she's a great judge, as the case may be. Or I go to church with them, or their kids play with my kids in baseball. Transparency. Folks, government has to be transparent. Private individuals have the right to be private. Transparency is for government, not for private individuals. If you want to give money to the ACLU because you believe that they stand for liberty, give money to the ACLU, but you might not want to broadcast it to the whole world. But ACLU might come out and say, you know what, we don't really like such and such a candidate for a judge because they tend to rule against the things that we intend to. That's fine. I don't care what the cause is. Or they could come out and say, we think this judge is wonderful. Now they have to disclose all of their donors. No, absolutely not. It's why I turned down sponsorship of this bill flat to begin with. Under this bill, any citizen can sue anybody, particularly an organization, if they just say you have failed to disclose all of your donors. Bring out your list again. Come in here and hire you and a lawyer and submit to depositions and interviews and court proceedings and spend a bunch of money so we can make absolutely sure you disclosed every donor that you're supposed to disclose. Maybe you did. Maybe you had no donors. But you go ahead and publish something that they don't like against one of the candidates that theirs favorite. That's what's going to happen. That's what this is a get-even bill. Now let's talk about one race, because I know both candidates. I love both candidates. I respect both candidates. In the last race, we had Judge Goodson. We had David Sterling. And y'all know that there were some horrible things go wrong with.
All right, folks, that was State Representative Douglas House. I think one of the best speeches of the session. Transparency is for government, not private individuals. Okay? We're got to take a break. Coming up next, we have a special guest. Carrie Cheshire with Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and Empower Texans Group is going to come on, talk to us about this issue of taxpayer-funded lobbyists. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Conduit News Radio.
Protect you, or the federal government to protect you. Then the reality is you are enslaved to those entities, because the value of your life is now dependent upon how those entities value your life. So when somebody else has to protect you, then they have to place a value on your life. And if on that particular day they feel your life is not worth the sacrifice, then you are discarded. And so whenever any external person places a value on your life, has a legal authority to place a value on your life, then you are enslaved to that person.
I can't argue with that. And right now my listeners understand exactly what I said earlier when I mentioned how you are a really good teacher. You talk about George Mason in this article, and it really struck me. I interviewed, there's an author I interviewed last week who came up with a new book on George Mason, and he was just saying, people don't know about this guy. They don't know enough about George Mason and how, and I know specifically you had several George Mason quotes in the lectures that I heard a couple of months ago here in Arkansas. So talk a little bit about George Mason and his contribution to the concept of the Second Amendment.
George Mason was a really passionate advocate for individual liberties, and he was an amazing orator. He was actually so passionate about individual liberty that he refused to sign the original Constitution and didn't because he believed that it didn't do enough to secure individual rights. And over time, he believed that it would empower the federal government to become more kingdom-like. I wish that our founders would have taken a little bit more to heart the warnings of Mason and the Anti-Federalists. They had a really, really good handle on human nature and how human nature always interacts with government. But Mason, one of the quotes that I use from Mason is a very powerful quote. He says, 40 years ago, when the idea of enslaving America was born in Great Britain, he said the Parliament was advised by an artful man who was governor of Pennsylvania. Now, the governors in the American colonies were generally appointed by the king, so they were not elected by the people at that time. And so this Pennsylvanian governor was appointed by the king, had a loyalty to the king and to Parliament. And he says that the Pennsylvania governor said that to disarm the people was the best and most effectual way to enslave them. But
bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back, folks. This is Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters, guest hosting, filling in for Paul today. And I want to introduce you to a special guest we have on today. His name is Carrie Cheshire. He is the Vice President for Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. And we'll just bring him on now. Carrie, good morning. Just introduce yourself, your organization, Empower Texans Group, and then we're going to talk a little about this issue of taxpayer-funded lobbyists.
Well, good morning, and thanks, Josh. My name is Carrie Cheshire. I'm the Vice President of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. And really, we're a pro-taxpayer watchdog group that keeps tabs on the Texas legislature. You know, we find time and time again people are able to pay attention to what happens up in Washington, D.C. through Fox News, through Heritage Foundation, through a number of different news sources, but no one's really watching the Texas Capitol from a conservative perspective. And right here in the People's Republic of Austin, the blueberry and the tomato soup of Texas, as Governor Rick Perry always called it, there's a lot of shenanigans that happen that probably wouldn't fly in other areas of the state.
And so what we do is we analyze legislation. We put out vote alerts on, House Bill 846 is one that we think is for taxpayers. Senate Bill 212 is one that we think is against taxpayers. And all the way throughout the process, we let lawmakers know what we think about legislation, and then we kind of come up with a report card at the end where every lawmaker gets a grade, 0 through 100, on how they did on tax, government, and limited government issues. As you can imagine, the lawmakers who do fairly well think that we do a good job coming up with our scorecard. The lawmakers that don't do so well and end up with scores kind of down more near the Democrats aren't real big fans of our organization. But for over 10 years, we've been providing this service to the people of Texas, to the voters of Texas, so they can be kind of have a more discerning eye on who they choose to represent them in the next election. And we found a lot of success.
Yeah. Carrie, you mentioned scorecard, and I think scorecards are so important. Let me ask you this. Have there been any scorecard of the scorecards? Because there's scorecards here in Arkansas letting people know how their legislator voted, and at least one, the president of the Senate here in Arkansas did his own scorecard of scorecards, scoring the scorecards, trying to kind of diminish their impact. Has that happened in Texas yet?
It absolutely has, and it's always really funny. Each session there's some new organization that decides, we're going to issue our own scorecard and kind of rate issues ourselves. Oftentimes it's the Chamber of Commerce who's very interested in corporate welfare and funding in-state tuition for illegal immigrants, which we have here in Texas. And what they'll do is they'll kind of go through and they'll cherry-pick votes, and then they'll come out with their own scorecard and their own lawmakers on it. But if you actually go and apply those votes, oftentimes, Democrat tax-raising state representatives and state senators have even higher scores than the Republicans. So it's just farcical. We really find that, for us on our issue, people trust what we do at Texans for Fiscal Responsibility because we've been doing it the longest, and we have a lot of credibility on this issue.
Nice. Well, I think scorecards are so important. But the issue I want to talk with you about is, and I was following this, I was Michael Quinn Sullivan, I follow him on Twitter, and it was fascinating reading his Twitter feed last night as this bill was going through the Texas House. But just let's back up first and talk about this issue of taxpayer-funded lobbyists. What is that, and how does it impact taxpayers?
Well, that's a great question. Taxpayer-funded lobbying is where some governmental jurisdiction, whether that's a city, whether that's a county, whether that's a state agency, uses taxpayer dollars to hire lobbyists to lobby the Texas legislature on specific issues. And we see this as a very pervasive problem here in the Lone Star State, with over 41% of lobbyists and almost $50 million each legislative session is being spent by governmental entities, oftentimes to lobby against taxpayers. So I'll give you an example. We've got a big property tax reform bill here in Texas. Texas has probably the 4th highest property taxes in the nation. We have some of the highest rates. We just don't have some of the highest appraisals because we're a low cost of living state. And there was a big reform trying to make it to where if local governments, city governments, county governments, school boards tried to raise taxes by more than 2.5% a year, that would trigger an automatic vote of the people, so that the people would have an opportunity to say, yes, tax us more, or, you know what, make do with what you've got. And just a legion of lobbyists descended on the Capitol, and they actually killed that legislation last session. I don't think they're going to be successful this time. It looks like we are going to get it across the finish line. But time and time again, taxpayers are coming down. You're driving in 2 hours, 3 hours. For some Texans, it might be even 12 hours to come to the Texas Capitol and make your voice heard. Meanwhile, your tax dollars are already being spent here within the halls of the Capitol to wine and dine legislators to vote against your interests. We just think that compelled speech is an absolute scourge. It's the antithesis of of the Republican government that our founding fathers gave us, and it's something that needs to end here in Texas.
Yeah. That last point, man, that's really good. Compelled speech, because that's what it is. Money is speech, and taxes are not voluntary, as everyone knows, and they are then using the taxes from the taxpayers to compel speech that, in this instance, goes directly against the taxpayers' own interest. And you say almost $50 million, and half of the lobbyists are
Yeah.
getting some kind of government check to lobby for. And these are what, cities and counties, school districts? Is that typically the entities that are pushing it?
You know, it's predominantly cities, counties, school districts, but I don't know exactly y'all's format of government up in Arkansas, but we've got emergency services districts, municipal utility districts, community college districts, healthcare districts, all kinds of governmental agencies. And then, of course, the actual governmental agencies themselves. I mean, the Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission has registered lobbyists that are using taxpayer dollars to fight against regulatory changes and other things. And the kind of common pushback, actually 91% of Texans think that taxpayer-funded lobbying needs to be completely abolished.
Wow.
But there's some people that push back and say, well, don't you think that there might be a good public policy decision? And, maybe there is. But the problem is, I'm a taxpayer here in the city of Austin. And the legislative agenda for the city of Austin, which is advocated for on a $950,000 a year contract, both in Austin and in Washington, D.C., is to advocate for gun control, is to advocate for taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. Now, I don't support any of that as a fiscal conservative, as a true conservative, but some of my neighbors absolutely support those things. But just as I shouldn't be forced to subsidize this, I wouldn't expect them to be subsidizing a pro-life message or a pro-gun message. Government should be out of the business with compelling speech of private individuals. If I want to donate to a pro-life or pro-gun or pro-taxpayer cause, I'm free to do that. But the government shouldn't furnish my opposition.
Well said, yeah. In Arkansas, the way we're seeing it is mostly cities, like our Municipal League, Association of Counties, and then school districts. So, Carrie, this session, there was actually a bill filed, and it was one little piece, basically teacher administrator groups. You couldn't use taxpayer money in these teacher administrator groups to hire lobbyists. And, Carrie, you would have thought that they wanted to drag people out in the street and flog them. That was the response that came at this bill, the negative response. And that thing died quickly in a House committee this session. So that's kind of background where we're at in Arkansas. It's not bubbling up as much as it is there, but it sounds like Texas strongly against it, 91%. So update us on the bill this session, how that's played out, and I know yesterday was a really big day for the bill.
That's right. So for Texans have been fighting for probably about 10 years to abolish the practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying. Basically, as soon as people started figuring out, how much money was being spent, how effective these lobbyists were being in fighting against taxpayers, but haven't found any success. This session, however, the Texas Senate, which is our most conservative chamber in the Texas legislature, passed out a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying on a party line vote of 1912, kicked it over to the Texas House. In the Texas House, it was watered down in committee to apply only to 4 areas of, saying that these taxpayer-funded lobbyists couldn't advocate on issues of tax policy, on issues of bonds, and a few others. But it was really a very, very weak and watered-down bill. The bill came to the floor, and then they exempted school districts from it as well. So it would have really only applied to cities and counties. But once they exempted school districts, and they also exempted healthcare districts, you're talking about exempting over 65% of the state budget spending from the taxpayer-funded lobbying bill. And then very quickly, liberal Republican lawmakers joined with Democrats to tack on amendments saying that the legislation didn't even apply in a county of a population of 250,000 or less, or the cities therein. And just to give you some perspective, Texas has 254 counties. With that amendment, the taxpayer-funded lobbying kind of watered-down ban that didn't really do anything would have only applied to about 21 to the 254 counties. And then even with that complete watering down and the complete joke of the bill, liberal Republicans joined with Democrats to scuttle it. It only ended up getting about 60 votes at the end of the day. out of our 150-member Texas House. So it's a very frustrating defeat for taxpayers, but the enlightening thing is that now we know where lawmakers stand. You know, if it's killed in a back alley or a closed-door committee room and we don't exactly know who's for it and against it, now Texas taxpayers have a clear idea of who is for ending taxpayer-funded lobbying and who thinks that it ought to continue, who's siding with the taxpayers and who's siding with the lobbyists. And they're going to have a great opportunity to make their voice known in March 3rd, 2020, when we have our next election.
Nice. And that's, you know, sometimes that's the way the process works out. You know, my experience has been in Arkansas that legislators do not want to go on the record if they don't have to. And it sounds like there's no wiggle room anymore on that issue in Texas. They have taken a stand in the House and Senate there, and now people have a choice. If you say 91% of Texans oppose taxpayer-funded lobbyists, and then these folks down there voted against it or did maneuvers to water it down and kill it, yeah, I don't like their chances next election cycle.
Yeah, you know, it's not looking too good for them on that issue, or honestly, a myriad of other issues. People actually, look at Congress and they think that it's, a great example of dysfunction. That's true, it is. But here in the Texas legislature, right under their own nose, lawmakers are preparing to grow the size of the state budget by 16%. That's double the rate of population and inflation here in the Lone Star State. So you're growing twice the rate of the economy and taxpayers' ability to pay. And you're looking time and time again, positive conservative regulation changes and issues like this ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying are being waylaid in the Texas legislature. And I don't think conservatives, I don't think taxpayers, I don't think Texans are going to be very excited when this legislature concludes next week. And I think they will make their voice heard in the upcoming election. And I think we will see a grand upheaval in the lawmakers that we have who are not interested in standing up for taxpayers.
Kerry, one thing that I saw on social media was that, I don't know what group it was, it might have been and correct me if I'm wrong, but the State Republican Party of Texas supported this bill, and then it failed, and y'all have majority Republican state like Arkansas, and we're seeing that here in Arkansas. You have platform issues that are failing. In Arkansas, we have supermajority Republicans. So speak to that. How is that dynamic working in Texas and going forward? How is that going to work if the Republican Party platform is not being implemented? What happens then?
Right. Well, that's a great question. So, Texas has had basically no Democrat has been elected statewide in Texas since 1994. Republicans took the Texas House in 2002. They took the Texas Senate a few after, and we've had over a decade of unified Republican control. But despite that, repeatedly you have seen conservative priorities die on the vine. This session, the Texas GOP had 5 legislative priorities chosen by delegates at last summer's convention, where we have the largest political convention with voting delegates in the world, with almost 9,000 people voting on what the platform should be, what the legislative priorities should be. And, the issues are, constitutional carry, saying that you don't need to have an open carry license or a concealed carry license in order to openly carry a handgun, abolishing abortion, which you've seen Alabama and Georgia and some other states do, ending taxpayer-funded lobbying, and a couple of other issues. And every single one of them has been killed in this Texas legislative session. I think the grassroots activists that I talk to on a daily basis as I'm going out speaking to Republican women clubs, Tea parties, conservative groups, they are very, very frustrated that they've elected Republicans. They've placed their trust in these people who have said they'll advocate for limited government, free market principles, and conservative issues. And watch them come down to Austin and side with the Austin lobby, side with the bureaucrats, side with the liberal media that has such an incestuous relationship with our Texas legislature. And I think as these lawmakers go back home to their districts, they're going to feel the wrath of their taxpayers who are frustrated that, despite the state coming in with a $10 billion surplus, we're looking at a property tax relief package that will not lower people's taxes. We're looking at taxpayer-funded lobbying legislation dying on the vine, pro-gun legislation dying on the vine. It's very frustrating as a Texan to watch Texas kind of fall back and other states take up the mantle of leadership within kind of the conservative movement. We kind of think here in Texas we're the crown jewel of the Republican Party. We've got the most electoral votes. We've got kind of this big spirit of rugged individualism. We used to be our own country, for God's sake. And we're watching Alabama and Georgia and Utah take that position of leadership from us and watch ourselves fall behind. It's a very frustrating thing as a Texas Republican because we're not used to second place. We're not used to third place. We're used to leading the nation. And unfortunately, right now, there's not a will within the Texas legislature to do that. I think there is a will within the people to do that, and I think we will see a change.
Right. Well, Gary, I share some of your frustration here in Arkansas on some issues. There's still some long-term issues in the platform that have not been implemented, and our spending and taxes. That's not getting much better either. But Carrie, what is happening in Texas that I guess you can share with the people here in Arkansas? We have statewide audience on conservative stations around the state. What works in Texas for people to kind of get involved? Because it sounds like this issue you said, been trying for, I think, a decade. And each session you're getting closer and closer. So you're, how they say it, marching the football down the field. I don't really like that analogy because I think you should score a touchdown every time if you have the numbers. But what do people do in Texas that you would encourage people to do in Arkansas to try to implement these conservative Republican platform policies that we all say we support?
Right. Well, that's a great question. To continue with your football metaphor, it's great to watch an air raid offense just throw something down the field. But it's honestly, if you watch Alabama, a lot, it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust that beats the tar out of both of our teams.
Yes, unfortunately.
And so, I encourage, the success that I see is that people who connect with their neighbors, with their friends, people who run for precinct chair, people who start a conservative organization, a little tea party, a Republican women's group, a conservative club, and you just start talking to your neighbors and friends, and you take issues. I mean, people can get upset about what they're doing up in Washington, D.C. They can get frustrated about, what's going on over in Europe or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, it's that guy on the school board, it's that guy on the city council who's raising your taxes. And it's your state representative who's not doing anything about it. It's your state senator who's not passing those platform issues. So talk to your neighbors and friends and then get together with one another and go knock on more neighbors and friends' doors. That's the most effective way to make your voice heard, to get more people recruited to your movement. And it's all about, waging campaigns against these people. There's a great quote by former Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois that says, "Once I've felt the heat, I see the light." And that's absolutely true. We absolutely have to hold our lawmakers' feet to the fire and make them understand that we expect them to deliver. We expect them to come back with real reforms or blood on their knuckles from fighting for it, or else we're going to replace them with somebody who will deliver. We're going to replace them with somebody who will get it across the finish line. And, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's as easy as organizing your friends and family and saying, hey, we're not going to vote for Representative Joe. Bubba, do you think that you can run? Daryl, do you think you could run this campaign? Let's get together. Let's change this. And even if you don't actually unseat that person in an election, you do kind of put the fear of Jesus into them. And typically they come back to the next legislature and they're voting a little bit differently. Politics is a game of inches, and you just got to show up.
Nice. Carrie, great interview. Thanks for coming on. That's Carrie Cheshire, Vice President of Texans for Responsibility. I'll give you the last word.
Well, thanks so much, Josh. I, again, encourage y'all, if you're interested in learning more about what is going on at the Lone Star State, visit our website at texasscorecard.com. That's where we kind of provide some political coverage of what's going on in the Texas legislature and a few areas across the state from a conservative perspective of, kind of leaving the fake news behind and telling you what's actually happening. And then if you're interested in what votes exactly we choose and put on our fiscal responsibility index, go to index.empowertexans.com. We've got over 100 votes, and you can click on each one of them, see a video of what it is, why we included it, and see if you agree with us on that issue. See if you don't. And you can adjust the lawmaker's score accordingly. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kerry. Great information. That's TexasScorecard.com. You can see what's going on down in Texas. Appreciate you coming on, Kerry. Very similar to what's going on in Arkansas. A lot of similarities there. So it's encouraging. Maybe they just saw a defeat, but it's encouraging to know, hey, we're not in this alone. Republicans and conservatives who are still fighting to measurably reduce the size and scope of government in Arkansas. That there's hope, and these are what other states are doing. But we got to take a break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell. This is Josh Waters filling in for Paul, and we will be right back after this.
Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799.
Hey, Sue, remember that guy I used to date, Tom? Oh, yeah, the successful stockbroker. Nice guy. Smart, cute. He seemed like the whole package.
Yeah. This governor was saying, look, don't show up on their doorsteps, collect their guns, because they'll shoot you in the forehead. What you have to do is make it difficult for them to get the arms and the ammunition and the parts and the pieces that they need to keep their arms and ammunition in order. And you also need to place in the minds of the people a peace and comfort so that the people don't believe that they actually need their own protection, that someone will come to their rescue and protect them. And so through that gradual disarming, which is an intellectual disarming and not necessarily a physical disarming, the governor of Pennsylvania was saying this is the best way to disarm the people. You convince them to disarm themselves. You make it inconvenient, you make it difficult, you make it unnecessary.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
All right, welcome back, folks. It's Josh Waters in for Paul Harrell today. Enjoyed being with you yesterday and today. Tomorrow, be sure you tune in. Got another special guest host for tomorrow. Paul will be back on Thursday. But tomorrow, Jan Morgan will be guest hosting Conduit News Radio. So you do not want to miss that. Man, great interview there with Kerry. It's great to see what's going on in other states, the similar battles that are going on, and just a wealth of knowledge on the importance of the issue of taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And it really is. It's compelled speech. It's compelled speech that you, the taxpayer, have to pay taxes, and those taxes are used to speak and lobby many times against your own self-interest for more taxes. And we're seeing that in Arkansas. Municipal League, Arkansas Association of Counties, some of these teacher groups that keep killing school choice in Arkansas. So anyway, great show, great interview. You can catch that interview in the entire show today across digital platforms. You can catch our interview earlier with Joey Williams about free speech. That speech we played from Douglas House. It's on the YouTube page, Conduit News. Facebook.com/Conduit News, ConduitNews.com. It's all there. And I just encourage you to go check it out. while you're there at conduitnews.com, if you want to support conservative news here in Arkansas, you can do that by becoming a Patreon subscriber. Click that support tab on conduitnews.com. I'm a Patreon subscriber to Conduit News. Encourage you to be. It's a way you can support the conservative message here in Arkansas. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to fill in for Paul. Great show. Arkansas, as Paul says, be safe, and tune in tomorrow for Jan Morgan guest hosting.